Okay. Good evening. My name is John Harrington. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. I want to thank all of you for coming out on what I understand is a balmy and warm, one of the warmer nights in the Bemidji area. So I appreciate all of you coming out tonight to visit with us. The Attorney General, Keith Ellison, is on his way in, but in respect to all of you that made it here, I want to make sure that we have as ample opportunity to hear from all of you as is possible. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and then part of the beauty of what we have started out doing is making sure that the entire process is live streamed, so all of the other working group members will be able to view this either live stream or they'll be able to review it later on off of the Department of Public Safety's website where it will be housed. This is a working group on reducing deadly force encounters. The origins of that started actually before I became the Commissioner of Public Safety, and I think it started before Keith Ellison was elected to the Attorney General's office. Keith and I both have long histories of working in community. I as a cop for 40 years between the City of St. Paul and Metro Transit, and Keith as an elected representative at the state and federal level. Over my career, I have had the unfortunate duty to meet with families who have had loved ones taken in deadly force encounters with police. And I've also had the unfortunate duty of burying several cops who were killed in deadly force encounters that happened in my cities. In both cases, I've had to sit with the moms and sometimes the dads, sit with the families, to have a conversation with them about what just happened in their life. One of the most vivid conversations I can recall is sitting with the family of Philandro Castile after he was killed, and listening to them talk about their experience of the shooting, talk about the experience with the investigation and ultimately the trial, and their experience of having to try and live without someone that was incredibly dear to them, and that, frankly, as they've said, you never expect as a parent, you never expect to be burying your child. And so those words have always resonated with me. They've been in my mind for a long time, and because of that, the Attorney General and I made the decision to convene a working group on how to make deadly force encounters as infrequent as possible. I've heard from many people who have told me, well, you know that you're not going to be able to completely eliminate them all. And I will be first to admit that I don't expect that we're going to eliminate all of them by this process or any other process. But if we can save one life, if we can save one family from the agony of having to go through that, in my mind, that's still a value. And I think we can do better than that, frankly. But I am committed to the idea that we need to make deadly force encounters as infrequent and as rare as possible. And when they do happen, we need to make sure that the families and the community can have absolute certainty and trust in the process that goes along with that. We have convened this working group. It is about 50% community and 50% professionals that are in the criminal justice. We have judges and prosecutors and police sheriffs and police chiefs. We have academics. We have community activists, all on this working group. We wanted to make sure that we had a working group that was a broad cross-section of the professionals who intersect with this particular action. We wanted to make sure that it was also a diverse working group, and it is about half people of color and half white Minnesotans. We have started out with the premise that we wanted to make sure that we were getting voices from all over Minnesota. One of the things that we learned in one of our very first meetings was that 60% of the officer-involved shootings, 60% of the deadly force encounters happen in greater Minnesota rather than in the metro area, which is not necessarily how it's perceived. And so many people were surprised when we made the commitment that we were going to be in Bemidji and Cloquet and Worthington and Mankato to make sure that we got people's voices from all over the state of Minnesota and not just in the Twin Cities area. We have elected representatives on the working group. We have Republicans and Democrats. We have House and Senate. We have really tried to make sure that this working group is as I said, a broad-based and very thoughtful group of individuals. We have had 3 meetings thus far, one in the Twin Cities area and 2 in Greater Minnesota, and we have had really in-depth conversations about what happens when an officer makes the decision to use deadly force, whether that we've had it from the legal perspective, we've had it from the psychological perspective, we've had it, but most importantly, I will add, most importantly, at every meeting, we've had it from the family's perspective. We've had moms, we've had dads, we've had relatives that have come and testified in front of us about what their experience with this was. And for me, those have been some of the most touching moments in not just in this process, but in my career, listening to them explain and tell us their stories. We have been having consultations on, we have been collecting information, not so much consultation, but we have been collecting information on a wide variety of topics that the families and the subject matter experts have brought to us. We have been having conversations about the intersection between mental health and officer-involved shootings, and we've learned that in about 50% of the cases, the person that died was in fact going through some kind of a mental health crisis, and we started looking at what are some of the other options there. We have learned from the families that one of the biggest obstacles to their feeling like they had some closure was the lack of a family liaison. That once the shooting happened and after the investigation, they felt like they got cut off from the system. And so in part because that has been probably one of the most consistent things we've heard from family members, we have already begun that process of creating a family liaison and coordinator at the BCA. And in fact, we already have a position described, a position funded. We have 145 applications that we are currently reviewing to hire this family liaison. And so very shortly, when and if this happens again, there will be a person who will be able to reach out to the families, a person who, when the family has a question in the middle of the night, will be able to answer their call, and who, when the investigation is complete, will not simply go away, but will be there as a resource for that family member ongoing. We have had one other listening session. This is our second. We have one more on Thursday, and that is in Worthington. So we will have covered the Twin Cities, northern Minnesota, and now going back to southern Minnesota. And then we will have our last actual hearing on January 6th. And at that session, we will be talking about how do we bring people back together? How do we heal the tears in the fabric of our community that an officer-involved shooting, a deadly force encounter, the death of one of our loved ones creates? How do we create that? How do we recreate and reinstill that trust between the police and their community? And so we are looking to have that last session, and then after a deliberation, we will begin actually drawing up recommendations for follow-up action. One of the things that the Attorney General and I both committed to when we started this is that what we were drawing up would not be another book sitting on a shelf in somebody's library, that these will be actionable items that you can expect to not just see a list of recommendations, you can expect to see action that will follow up on the recommendations. The action we've taken with the family liaison is simply the first of what I believe are several concrete operational steps that we can help take. Some of them will certainly be legislative actions that we will recommend, and once we recommend them, that leaves our power and our ability to control them. But you can expect that there will be legislative recommendation, there will be policy recommendations, there will be practical recommendations, and so we are looking forward to bringing this to a point where we can actually start doing the work. This process has been about gathering the information that will enlighten the work. The next step is to actually roll up our sleeves and get things done. Tonight, we are here to hear from you. We're here to hear from the community. We're here to hear from folks that have been affected by this. I will tell you that what we've done in the past session is we have given everyone about 5 minutes to talk. That was sort of the agreed upon time at the last meeting. It looks like we have a little smaller group, so we may be able to stretch that a little bit further. But we will ask folks to come up. As I've mentioned, all of this is being live streamed, so everything is, it's a very transparent process, so that whatever you say here will be available for anyone that wants to see it. And we hope that you will tell us what you think we can do better. How would you want us to proceed, and to give us your best ideas. So with that, I will open it up. I think we're using that microphone and that podium over there. If folks want to step up to that and tell us what you think we should hear. Tell us your story, or tell us your solutions, or tell us your ideas. There are no bad solutions and no bad ideas. They're just simply the ones that haven't been explained yet to us. And on that note, thank you very much once again for coming out tonight. These are sobering events. They are horrible events for the families, and we recognize that. And for those of you that feel like this reopens some old wounds, we hopefully will be able to provide you with some resources to help with that. We recognize that retelling your story, if you've lost a loved one, cannot be easy, and it never, for most of the folks that I've talked to that have lost a loved one, what they will tell you is that that's a wound that doesn't really ever heal. People tell you that it will, but my conversations with them is frequently that it's a wound that stays open far longer than anyone would think. So, thank you.
Anin, Ogama Megzi Kwe, Indigo, Audrey Thayer, Indigenous Cause. Citizen here in Bemidji, living about 30 years. Raised my family, we're in a third generation here. Don't have a whole lot of experience, but did 10 years with the ACLU with the Greater Minnesota Racial Justice Project here in Bemidji. Closed the office in 2013. 2 weeks ago, we had a Voices for Racial Justice. We had a focus group over at Northwest OIC to hear the thoughts and concerns of the population of under 40 who are Native in the community. Unfortunately, after 30 years of living in this community, we haven't moved forward a whole bunch. And that's disheartening to me. Sitting through with the loss of Robbie Earl way back, and that was a situation in a little part of Bemidji called Nymore. And since that time, and I still have access and have the hundreds of very devastating stories of Indian people in this community of things that have happened with law enforcement. So how do you solve that? You know, you start working. And from what I got from the focus group 2 weeks ago was a lot about education, which I believe, and we have we have people attempting to do education and diversity, but it doesn't always get us to the table where I'd like to see us at the table. Diversity is a pretty word. It's like roses. I still feel we need to have that conversation of justice for the Indian communities that come in from the 3 reservation areas of Bemidji, often young families, different perspectives. We have some large problems. So what are we doing? I believe we should have a police oversight committee here, and the chief of police is going to meet with us, which I'm excited just to talk and start thinking about how we can do that. I don't want to place blame. I'm angry. I have been angry with what I see in this community, but that doesn't help it. We have to find solutions. Education, working not only, it isn't for the Indian people to have to do that education, it's the non-Native community that has to teach their own. How to look at different cultures who are in our community and expanding as time goes by. So obviously I'm aged, I'm getting older with 3 generations, but I can personally say I think some of our family owns some of the benches in law enforcement building there with the courtroom, and I'm not ashamed to say that. But I watched the confusion of lack of understanding, lack of cultural misunderstandings. And again, we have a large urban population here now in Bemidji, different perspectives. I know there's individuals in the room here that also are raising their families who have come in from the reservation communities. So we need massive education. We need funds to do that. And the mental health issue, both sides. Not only in our community are we dealing with mental health issues, we're also dealing with law enforcement having mental health issues. I really believe that. How can you not have that in situations where the PSDT is there for our law enforcement and the reactions? No, I don't think anyone should die at the hands of a gun. I said that when Will May passed. I just don't believe that. And I think we can do something different in this community. We're small enough yet, we can, but we have to have a huge understanding what it's like with those 3 reservations that are encircling this and supporting this community. So I'm looking at how we can make those changes. And I heard education from the young families, not understanding the systems. I'm not sure anybody can really, when we walk into the courtroom, understand the terminology and the processes and the delays and the backup of the courts in defense of the attorneys they have to support, the huge caseloads. And I'm not sure if the public defenders are still walking with wagons full of files to the Beltrami County Courthouse, but that, and I suspect from what I know in that community, that hasn't changed much, so the caseloads are huge. So how do we support officers with a quick trigger? So we need to have that education for them, not the diversity education. I am tired of the diversity education. We need to really have an understanding of cultural difference, and that is huge. With that, I will close. Miyu.
Bonjour, Anin. Givita Gishka Quindishnikas. Misquagamizaga Evening and Donchu. I'm from Red Lake. My name is Renee Gurno. I live here in town. I was really listening to the things that you were saying, Mr. Harrington, and there's a couple things where we need to back up, okay? One thing you were talking about, restoring and regaining trust. There's no trust to be regained. There's none to be restored. There wasn't in the beginning. The indigenous people in Minnesota make up, 2-3% of the total population. We make up almost 25% of the prison population on any given day. So it's not even logistically possible for 0.5% to make up 25% of the prisonable felonies. So there's something inherently wrong with the system that targets our people. There's also disproportionate sentencing. And of course here, in this area, Bemidji is a border town, and it has the same racist attitudes as any border town. And in Beltrami County Jail, you can look online on any given day, and there's between 90 and 98% Native people in jail. And so we always look on there, see who our relatives are. They got caught over the weekend. And there's when a non-Native person gets pulled over by the cops, they're thinking, gee, I hope I don't get a ticket. And when a Native person gets pulled over by the cop, they think, God, I hope I don't get dead. I hope I don't get killed here. And we're very concerned about that. Our young men and women are the most vulnerable to this kind of violence, and every one of our families has been impacted by it. As my sister here was talking about education, it goes very, very deep, because the process of colonization has cut us off from our own self-knowledge. And we need to have the freedom and the resources to reclaim and put that back in place, because that is where our recovery lies. And trauma, and every Native person is suffering from post-traumatic stress, every one of us. And so when you add the other traumas that come along with trying to live in this society that is set up against us, we have trauma after trauma. And what we need also is to have the resources and the space and the understanding to revitalize and strengthen our own indigenous self-knowledge. That's where our strength lies. And a lot of our young people are vulnerable because they don't have that. I'm working right now on a presentation on the school-to-prison pipeline for Native America, in Native Minnesota. And it's really deep. It has to do with the whole structure of American society, but it has to do with that our people don't see any reflections of our reality in the curriculums in school at all. And even on our reservation schools, it's really minimal, because the public school has a stranglehold there. So there's a big difference between having a culture-based school and having a public school with a little bit of culture thrown at it. You understand what I'm saying by that? And what that does is that even though we're supposed to be grateful for these scraps to our identity, what it does is it can further marginalize, because it's the first to go when the money runs short, all of that sort of stuff. And so if our own people have trouble understanding our own culture and the depth of our brilliant spiritual knowledge, there's no way that people on the outside of our communities can begin to grasp who we really are. And because we are the only indigenous people here, everyone else comes from somewhere else. And that's completely sort of the problem with the schools, the normalization of whiteness and the normalization of whiteness as success. All of that stuff goes into it. The low expectations. When you go into Bemidji High School, and you look in detention, it's our kids that are sitting in there preparing for prison. It's all of those things. It's societal, it's systemic, and it's systematic. And Native people in Bemidji are subject to some ugly racism. And it's not even covert. It's in your face. And so when you're talking about both sides this, both sides that, no, it's not like that. We're on the receiving end of injustice. It's not an equal across the board, let's have some cultural understanding. No, we understand that white system. We know it thoroughly. But there's no movement in the other direction. So all of those things, I don't have one single answer to any of these things. All I know is that we have to keep going forward. And where I land is so solidly with my own people and with the education of my own people, and continually doing ceremonies to strengthen our identity, because that's the key. Strong identity is the key. When you are strong into your identity, it's harder for the systems of oppression and injustice to come down on you because you're standing in your strength. So the vulnerability comes from sort of the more tender areas of not having self-knowledge. But how is a elementary child or a high school kid or middle school kid supposed to stand up against that whole system? They know that they're on the receiving end. And there's another piece, the disproportionate sentencing. The disproportionate sentencing of Native people within those guidelines, is really extreme. I went to Stillwater last week with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan to meet with our brothers and sisters. It is. It's totally your fault. No, I'm kidding. So I was in Stillwater last week with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, and was able to meet with some of our brothers over there and to bring some cultural stuff. And the new commissioner made some promises about increased cultural experiences for our Native people in there. But there are way too many Native people in the prisons. And it's once they get in that system, it's so difficult to get out. That, they get violated for every little thing. One of my dearest friends was killed by the police in May. They pulled him over for a traffic stop and then shot him 3 times. And, of course, whatever. But I've known him since he was very young. He was one of my students when I was teaching at Leech Lake Tribal College. And he got involved with the system and he could not get out. He didn't do drugs. He was not a gangbanger. He was a really good person. But they were violating him for things like drinking a beer, stuff that's not against the law. So anyway, the whole system is, it's when you were talking about we need to restore trust. Well, there's no trust to be restored. There never was. And Native people in Bemidji are always on the defensive every minute of every day. As you know, the W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about the dual consciousness. Are you always aware of who you are ethnically? Native people have that so strongly here. We are always aware, and we're always on the lookout, and we are always vulnerable, and it makes us very nervous. When I see a young Native person getting pulled over by the police, I will pull over and see what's happening. I'll watch. Anyway,
Thank you very much.
that's it. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, ma'am. Hey, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison. I'm your Attorney General in the state of Minnesota, and it's an honor to be here. We got started a little bit later than we had hoped, and so we're a little bit late. We do apologize, but very, very pleased to be here with you and with our commissioner and with some members of our task force. I see Senator Ingebretson here, and there may be others as well. It's a hope that we can hear your stories. We've been doing this work for several months now. We've had a number of folks come in and offer testimony. This is a statewide effort, and so it's important for us to be in Bemidji. We're going to be in Worthington in a few days. We've been in Mankato. We've been in Minneapolis. We've been in St. Paul. We've been around listening to people. We've gathered the ideas of people who have what you might call expertise because they've worked in the area and studied it. And we've also gathered the expertise of people who lived it. And so it's been an important thing. What we're hoping to do is finish up our work, draft a report, make some recommendations, and then implement those recommendations. And we hope to have your help and support to do those things. The goal is to help people survive. That means the officers, we don't want to lose them. It means civilians, citizens, we don't want to lose them. It means even if the shooting incident or the incident is deemed to be within the law, we are exploring ways to even avoid loss of life in that situation. And we're looking at it, of course, we're looking at a range of things. Discipline, we're looking at training, we're looking at a number of things to try to make sure that when citizens and officers engage each other, that we and put the preciousness of life central and do all we can to make sure people survive those encounters. I want to say that it's been an honor to work with the commissioner. Our commission has, our task force is half law enforcement, half civilian. We have Republicans and Democrats. We have a range of people from various walks of life, people from tribal communities, people from all walks of life, really. And it's been important to do that and get all voices. And so with that, I just want to say we benefit from you stepping forward and offering your reflections. And again, I hope I didn't miss too much. If I did, I know the commissioner will fill me in. But it's an honor to be with you here in Bemidji. So thank you.
I have a question. So the post board, when you file a complaint, has that changed, or is it still where it goes back to the area that the complaint's given?
The post board, we actually had them come in and testify. The system has not changed. It is still, the disciplinary action is held by the local police department, who is the hiring authority. And that has been a question that the working group has asked to review to see if there are changes that can be made and should be made to the post board's authority and the scope that they cover. So it has come up in our conversation, but currently it has not changed.
That's a problem. It's huge, because that's one of the trust issues for filing complaints, and we did many of them with the Racial Justice Project, with ACLU during the 10 years I was working up here. And they would go right back to the same area of the people that had the issues with us. It wasn't jumped into another area where they could carefully look at it. So you felt like it was just so internal that it didn't matter. So it would be nice if you could look at something different than that process.
People get very skeptical about that process. So what did you call, well, not a focus group, what'd you call it?
It's a working group.
A working group. Have you, met with, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan about all of this? Because she's she really wants to be involved with this whole thing.
Well, yeah, I know Peggy very well, been knowing her for 25 years. We talked about this, and the commissioner works directly with the governor's office. So I don't know if she's actually come to one of our meetings, but she's well aware of it.
She came into Stillwater with us, it was last week or a couple weeks ago. And she was honored by the men in there for having a native face in the system, you know, that was not afraid to speak for justice. And so that was really, she was really embarrassed, but it was great. You know, they are aware of her. Yeah,
Were you there as well?
I was.
I'm aware that there are lots of folks here that maybe not have been directly impacted by a deadly force encounter or an officer-involved shooting, but who are either elected officials or are part of the criminal justice system. And we would certainly be open to your reflections on the process and your insights as to how can we improve on this system, and how can we make sure that there is trust, that there is accountability, and that there is transparency. And so if folks have those kind of insights, rather than necessarily direct community input, we would also be interested in hearing your voices.
Bonjour. My name is Nicole Buckanaga. I'm a lifelong resident. We actually had quite a few discussions years ago, you and I. I used to do work with Voices for Racial Justice. Yeah. Yeah. She's a dear friend of mine, actually. Yeah. So I guess I'm a person that I would consider myself an organizer in this community. I've been organizing for well over about 12, 13 years now. Did a lot of organizing in the Minneapolis area. So a big concern of mine is obviously probably what led you to this community are some of the wrongful deaths that have occurred in the hands of whether it be the police force or within the jail itself. I mean, we're talking Alan Bolio in the 90s. You know, we're talking Robbie Earl. We're talking Mo Bolio, Vern May, Stephanie Bunker, Tony May, and now we got Hardell Sherrill. And so his mother really is shedding light on something that I feel should also have been something we in the Indigenous community here could have spearheaded. Because the police brutality and the targeting on the Indigenous community is no new phenomenon. I mean, let's talk history here. We can't talk about what's going on now because just because things happened 200 years ago does not mean they didn't affect us 2 minutes ago. Went from slave bounty hunters to targeting the Indians and chasing them off the land to keep the white farmers happy and safe. So the motive was always to keep the white community safe. But what they did was they developed a major distrust, a historical distrust with communities of color and the Indigenous community. And so targeting the black man and the Indian man is no new phenomenon, right? And so there's that root of the distrust that had been developed. And so here we are with a system, and I've sat and had multiple times coffee with Mike Maston here, trying to come up with a cohesive, realistic, engaging way to hack at the roots instead of at the branches, you know? And so one thing that concerned me was we discussed at that time the body cams. Now, he was more concerned with the financial burden that was going to create. And I understood where he was coming from on that, because where does this footage go? And then it gets reviewed by somebody, and then you can only have so many hours on a tape before it gets destroyed. Now, what if that footage was not properly reviewed and processed? What if there's some key but huge detail that could change the life of a man of color or a person of color that lied within those tapes? And so he was more focused on the financial burden. Me, I'm obviously going to be focused more on the accountability factor there. And so I guess we just agreed to disagree on that. Now, when Vern May was killed at the hands of Vital Duran, he's a police officer on the force, he was wearing a body cam. At that time, there was light shed that at any given time, 1 out of 3 Bemidji police officers were wearing a functional body cam. And so what this footage, that shed light, so why are we purchasing, and at the time we had a big grant that allowed us to purchase this equipment. But what they weren't looking at was the sustainability of it, where the financial cost was taken into account. Who's reviewing these? There needs to be a third-party person reviewing them, not the same guys working on the force that's mistreating us. And so where's the accountability there? And so that's a concern of mine. Now, after Vern May was killed, there was an issue with the body cam. That was released to the public in full disclosure, that video. Pretty hard to watch, just as it was to watch Philando Castile live or on Facebook. You know, those things are hard for us to digest and to know that they're happening to people that we know. And so in response to that, the Bemidji Police Department then, this is where I have a huge issue with, and it even furthers the distrust that we already have, is that there was no accountability to the fact that 1 out of 3 police officers was wearing a functional body cam. What they did was they doubled up on the officers in the vehicles. So you can ride around and see 2 officers in 1 vehicle. Now, a person with my experience and my life story, I have a major distrust with one officer. Now, you put two of them in my face. You're telling me that there's no accountability here. We're going to beef up on the amount of people that has the ability to shoot you in front of you. And so that's where I have an issue. And so that's an intimidation factor to people like me. And so the way we respond to that, and you know, I would have liked to see some accountability on behalf of the city council at that time too, because Rita Albright had the full capability to let that officer go. And that would have sent a message to the community and spoke volumes on where she stood and where those values were. And she failed to do so, but you know, that's another issue in itself. But there's layers of accountability. Now we're here to discuss the brutal encounters that we have with police, but we cannot ignore the brutal encounters that we have with the entire system itself, because those police get us to those judges. Well, those judges are throwing the books at us. They're keeping us in jail. They're putting barrier upon barrier in front of us. The prosecutors are the ones suggesting them. The probation officers. There's many layers to this justice system that there needs to be accountability in, and so that first encounter, that with the police sets the tone to the rest of the experience with the entire system. So that, I guess that's all I really wanted to say. Miigwech, thank you.
Bonjour, Keith. Wabashki Migazias in the cause. My given English name is Bob Whipple. I prefer the other one. I came here with an open mind. I've heard plenty of stories growing up in Cass Lake about Bemidji. A lot of it wasn't very good. And I was taught when I was growing up to keep an open mind and deliberate on words that I would use to address concerns that may impact our families, those that we live with and work with. I always have to keep that in front of me. Sometimes I can get very angry, and I can't take back if something mean is coming from me. I'm responsible for approximately 2,000 employees in a profession that demands a high degree of what I call integrity and character and ethics. If there ever is going to be a foundation that's going to be built on trust, that's got to be one of them. In my profession, we have to take care of the health and welfare of our employees. There's a great many things that happen in an organization that size. And one of the things that we require of those employees is training. Required training. Some are professional. They have to go to training to maintain their licenses. And I think that's the way you have to look at this part of it when it comes to changing the paradigm of enforcement. It demands that. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time talking here. I looked up some data, and what it said that whites will become the minority in 2045. That's not too far off. It's a generation. What's next year? 2020. So I hope you have some real good input in regard to establishing accountability when it comes to the governance, how those who stray from the fold, so to speak, enforcement profession. One thing that was said here resonated with me. And in the context of that, I hope that people here in this community, as well as my community, and every other community that have minorities, educate themselves. So, with all the things that I've said, I hope you really focus on requiring police officers, in order to maintain their license, that they take some courses. Communication is one. That's pretty big in my organization. Sexual harassment. Just a little bit of a side note here is psychological training. That's big. There's collateral effects to that. People are faced with danger. I know that. You know, I'm a Vietnam veteran. So I know what I'm talking about when it comes to people with twitchy fingers. You know? You got to learn how. You got to learn what to do. So make that a requirement. You know? You got people out there who need to know a lot of things. They're going to be faced with life and death situations. So I appreciate everybody listening to me. Miigwech, Bisandawig, Neen.
I do a training called Anishinaabe Worldview Training, and it's a 3.5-day intensive. And I did a pilot for Blandon Foundation. The chief of police of Grand Rapids came to this training, and we were talking about what racism is, what it isn't, and how it relates to up here because it's Native people here. And he says, well, I don't know if I believe that. And I said, well, chief, it felt great to sit up. I said, it's not a matter of belief. And he says, I'm going to check it out. And he came back the next day, and he said, I had so normalized the racism in my system, I didn't see what was right in front of my face. And in Grand Rapids, it's fewer than here in the jail, but it's even there, it's between 30 and 50% of the population on any day. And so he said, I would like you to do this training for all my officers. And I said, are you crazy? Why would I do that to myself? You know, here's got a Native woman, there's gonna be all these guys in blue, they're gonna so galvanize to shut me down. And he said, well, we'll do it a series of community trainings, and then I will require all of my officers to go through in increments. And so by the end of that year, all of the officers in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, had been through Anishinaabe Worldview training. And it changed a lot of things. Some of them, you know, it doesn't matter what you say, they're just gonna be more entrenched in it. But some people learn some things. One of the things they stopped doing is targeting reservation plates. They do a lot of that here, but but there were a number of other things, because they don't know the history of their own land either. They don't know the history of their own town, and they don't understand behavioral differences. The cops were saying, well, why won't you look at us? They're just trying to be evasive. And I know that doesn't have anything to do with it, you know, but it's not understanding cultural differences as well. So it ended up being really good, and I'm going to be going back and doing some more with their new officers. But you know, I wasn't gonna just go in front of a bunch of white guys in their blues. You know, that wouldn't have been productive at all. But it worked out okay that way. So I agree with what Bob was saying. I think that we're seeing some movement. The people don't know what they don't know.
What are some of the, could you describe the Anishinaabe training a little bit?
Well, it starts out with it starts out initially because we have what's called Anishinaabe protocol, which is to identify yourself. You've heard us all identify ourselves in our language, and who you are, who your clan is, where you're from. And so non-native people don't do this. They identify themselves by what their job is. And so we did it that way, so that then we say, how long have your people been here? Because we want to raise awareness immediately of our indigenous roots here. So, and then the first part is Anishinaabe creation story, because our relationship with the creation versus the colonizers' relationship with capitalism and the objectification of the natural world, it's like this. You know, we don't understand them, they don't understand us. And we're seen as, we've been promoted as enemies to our own country, because we stand for these things. We're, you know, obstacles to progress. So that's part of it. And then the afternoon is in the education of Native children, but not white man education. We know all about that. But what is traditional education in our communities, which is marked by ceremony, and everything that a child does brings the community closer and tighter and builds relationships, rather than the sort of alienation that happens in public schools. So then the second day is we use our prophecies, the seven fires prophecies, each of those prophecies being a period of time. So it's a history lesson, but it's not our history, but it's a history of colonization. Because what happened is the prophets came to our people many generations ago and said, there's some people coming who hate everything, and they're gonna kill and destroy. And we were going, oh, there's nobody like that. Each of the fires being a period of time. So we are now at the time of the seventh fire. Maybe you've heard about that.
I have heard that.
Yeah, and so what that means is that we're at the time of awakening, not just for us, but for all people. That non-native people are to be waking up to to their own higher consciousness, I guess you could say. So we're looking at history from this point because the prophet said, oh, at this time this is going to happen. In the sixth fire, this is going to happen. In the fifth fire, they're going to start taking the kids, you know. And so all of those things came true. And they said, you will know these things when the water becomes unfit to drink. And so we look at that, and then we look at subsistence economy and what is the foundation of reservation life, and what subsistence economy versus capitalism, and how the Dawes Act interfered with all of that, and how Red Lake holds, we hold our closed society very, very, we're very protective of that. And so it's also how poverty was created for us. And it's different than any other group. And then on the third day, we do a lot of social justice issues then. Racism and, you know, but internalized oppression too, because it's important that we look at how we are living with all of these things. And then the last half of the day is work for then. So what's your takeaway? What do you, now that you have this, what are you gonna do about it? You know, it's pretty intense, you know, and people get, I mean, I have to feel pretty confident to take them in that pain and bring them out, because non-native people get really, they go through a lot of sorrow when they, with this, as well as our people do.
How did you come up with it? Did you design it yourself, or did
I
somebody?
did. I think you guys took it, didn't you? You guys, oh no, you did, Kurt. Yeah. So a couple people in here have credit. And it's essentially Anishinaabe Studies 101.
Sure. Do you teach it just here?
No,
All over?
all over where, you know, I'm not interested in teaching just non-native people, but for people who work with our people.
Right.
That's my buy-in for that. You know, because I love my people. I'm solid with that. You know, so whatever I can do to make those things more smooth, I will.
So you heard training, you heard education. We have a small law enforcement program at Leech Lake Tribal College that has very little money to operate. And I spend a great deal of time talking to the director there. We talk about community policing, we talk about not getting enough education in areas. They're preparing them for post-board, most of the post-board standards, what they're getting at the college during the, other than the core courses. So they're learning, all the necessity, and then I do the speech and communications with that crew. But I'm concerned when the local Schwann's guy comes who sells Schwann's to me at the college, comes and brings his delivery, and then last week said, I'm not gonna be doing this anymore. And I said, what are you gonna do? And he said, well, I'll be working in Beltrami County Jail. And I said, well, what are you gonna do in there? And he said, I don't know. I've not worked with your people other than coming here. That concerns me, because I think that radiates in all the 7 counties up here that we funnel our people into, and they don't have, they're in there, 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours with our people while they're incarcerated. And we're talking about trust, so there's a piece there about the training. They're in very intimate connections there. One group's in behind the bars, the other one's out there. There's been, the deaths have happened in there, the beatings, the misunderstandings, and that's the Beltrami County manages that versus the city police. We have the city police on the streets, and yes, you do get scared. The other night I went to an event in the community here, and they had an officer, 3 squads pulling over, and I in my mind it said there's going to be a young brown man there being pulled out of the car. Sure enough, there he was standing behind the car. I don't know if it's overkill, what the situation was, so, you know, that they had to have 3 squads. Normally, what is there, 3 or to 5, you know, depending on a shift. But it feels really overwhelming to me, and of course, I was in a very, good spot that evening where the Native community was with the non-Native community in the arts, and we were doing poetry, and it was like, we're going somewhere. And then I get to see that on the street, and it triggered my emotions immediately to the trust issue. So those individuals back into the county jail systems in the 7-county area up here, from Monoman, Clearwater, Hubbard, Cass, Beltrami, Itasca, all carry high percentages over 85% to 90% Native people in there with people who don't know them culturally. You know, and that's important. Because how do we build community if you don't know community? You're there to take care of the job.
Well, what I'm hearing though, what you were saying is this guy automatically assumes that working at Beltrami County Jail means working with Native people.
Well, he knows he was delivering out the
But I
drive,
mean, that's
you know?
what he said though.
Oh,
He
yeah,
would
yeah,
have
yeah.
jumped out right away.
And I'm panicking for him too, because I like the guy, he brought me schwantz, you know? But it was like, okay, this guy has no skill and he's gonna be in there. But we don't pay enough either, we're up in an area here where there's no livable wage. We're dealing with poverty, we're dealing with people, you know, that don't, have access to, that dollar bill that keeps going and going and going. We had a series of car break-ins on 15th and Irvine the other night. And I was really grateful for Bemidji Chit Chat, because somebody posted that their car got broken in. So then what do I tell my family, because we live in that block area? Make sure you're in order, because there's gonna be police around now. Not that they'd be doing anything illegal, you know? They were there, and so on one hand, my neighbor, who's non-native, said, isn't that nice? The law officers are coming through the alleys now because we had the break-in down the street, well, now. You know, and I said, yeah, but, you know, it's pretty brown on our end of the block, and I'm more concerned about who's gonna get pulled over. And of course, I said something to my neighbor, and she said, yeah, you know, I have, you know, red light plates, the minute I can pull out, I'm concerned somebody's gonna, jerk us over, you know, and that's that thing, constant, that's our conversation, that's the norm.
It is all day.
Yeah, and that's not life. You know, that's not where it's at. And if I, you know, on the posts on social media, I mean, that's what we talk about. You know, and then there's the other crew who'll say, watch out, there's somebody coming up on 89, watch out between Cass Lake and Bemidji, you know, and, you know, so we have this fear group, and, you know, it's all boiled down to poor relations that we need to work on in northern Minnesota, and a misunderstanding of culture. And the most importantly, this town feeds off of the 3 reservations. Without our money, they don't exist. This city does not exist. And service workers live in Bemidji, people who have money live outside of Bemidji, in the nice lake areas that used to be ours.
I didn't want to interrupt Audrey.
Oh, we're
but
friends again,
I was-
Facebook again.
We
Thank
are,
you.
yes. But for how long, right? My name's Reed Olson. I'm a Beltrami County Commissioner, and I just wanted to talk about 2 issues that I think that are kind of relative to how I see my role. We do have a really healthy, I think, school to prison pipeline in our community. And often I try to think of what, I think often about what I can do about it. I don't know that there's a whole lot that I have accomplished yet, or maybe ever will accomplish, but one thing that I've been really concerned about a lot lately is the children of incarcerated parents. And I think that the legislature is going to hear more about that this session. I know that I'll be down there with a group of people that are working on some issues related to that. one of the number one predictors of being incarcerated as an adult is either being in the juvenile system as a child or being in the foster care system. You look at the foster care rates in our community, and they're nothing short of immoral when you see, and I'm trying to think back of the statistics that I know for 2017, I think half of all Native children spent at least, in our county, spent at least one day in foster care. One thing that drives foster care is the incarceration of a primary caregiver. One thing I would like the state to look at is incarceration or alternatives to incarceration for primary caregivers. Another big thing that promotes children being sent into foster care is pretrial incarceration. You look at the amount of people in our jail right now, almost all of them are pretrial. And of course, as was said earlier, of course, predominantly and overrepresented by natives. A lot of the reasons that people are incarcerated pre-trial is because they have lack of transportation or they have a mailing address that's invalid and they don't get a summons. And so there are things that we can do as a community to help people get to hearings so that they can stay out of jail pre-trial. Most of our people that are in there for misdemeanor charges, gross misdemeanor charges. So they're not going to be sentenced for much more time, you know. So I always think of like if I'm charged with a misdemeanor, I'm going to be able to post bail. I have a network. I'm going to be able to find the way to get out. Someone else might not be so lucky. We're going to get the same sentence on paper, but in reality, the other person is going to sit in jail for 3 to 4 weeks. I'm going to sit there for one night, you know. But then we each get technically the same sentence. That person lost their job. They maybe are going to lose their housing because of that. Then they're going to lose their children because they don't have housing, they don't have a job. And now they've gone from making a mistake, sure, but does that mean then, and I know I'm sure that a lot of people in this room know these anecdotes where someone does something wrong, sure, but it's a misdemeanor offense, and then they find themselves one night with their children with a steady job and a safe home to now being homeless without their children and without a job. So finding sentencing alternatives is really big. And the other thing that I want to mention to the room here is that the DOC has determined that our jail is I don't know, inappropriate, I guess is the shortest way to say it. And I think that anybody that's ever been in there knows that there's deficiencies. It's an old building and the physical plant is lacking in a lot of different ways. So we're going to be looking at either drastically remodeling or rebuilding a jail in the next 5 years. And although, I mean, I said to someone, I'm really excited for this opportunity to build a new jail. And someone said, don't say that too loud because nobody's, but we know that our jail is insufficient. It's the mental health of both the inmates and the employees are negatively affected. We have no direct sunlight in the jail. There's no exercise yard. So if you're in jail for, you know, a year minus a day, which can be, you're never going to see the sun. You're never going to be able to breathe fresh air. You're never going to be able to touch your loved ones because you're not even going to be able to look at them through the glass because we don't even have that sort of visitation anymore. It's all video. And it's a really crappy system. I go and talk to people often in my other job. And I think of what it must be like for a 5-year-old trying to talk to her father or mother, where with the video system, if you want eye contact, you have to look into the camera so you can't see your loved one, but that way they can see your eye contact. But if you want to look into their eyes, then there's no two-way eye contact. It might sound really silly, but for someone that's incarcerated, that interaction with their loved ones is really important. And then, as I was saying before, you know, considering the health of children with incarcerated parents, having that ability to have skin-on-skin contact is so important. So I could go on and on and on, but I think you get the gist, hopefully, of what I'm saying. But specifically to the jail, at the county, we formed 3 different groups that are going to be, they haven't met yet, but they're going to be meeting, and there will be a time when these committees are going to expand, and there's going to be hopefully ample opportunity. And I guess my challenge to you is to make sure that we have ample opportunity for members of the community to participate in what that jail is going to look like. You know, I really do think it's a really good opportunity. Some people have said that we should get rid of the jail and not have a jail in Beltrami, but I think that that will add problems. It'll stretch our loved ones away from their legal counsel and away from their families to farm them out to other counties. So we do need to take responsibility and run a jail that we can be proud of, that can protect the safety of the community, but the people in the jail are the community as well. I mean, they're our brothers and sisters, you know. So please be proactive or be active when we get closer to jail design, to programming in the jail, and make sure that we're doing our job and doing the right thing. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Olson. I appreciate your sharing that. You know, can I share a thought with you?
Mm.
So, you know, I live in Hennepin County, and for 16 years before I ever ran for any political office at all, I was a public defender and had juvenile clients. And when I remember going in there, it was always full. It was always packed with kids. A few years ago, somebody said, you know, why don't we, you know, why don't we have the default position the kids go home, and we only keep people who we need to keep based on public safety or flight risk. But everybody else is going to be presumed to be home, and we're going to call them, we're going to engage them to make sure they don't miss court dates. So like, you got your right number, we're calling you before your court date, we're sending you text messages to make sure you make your court date. And you know what? You go in the Hennepin County Juvenile Center now, it's really kind of empty. It's really kind of empty. There's whole units. There's no kids in there at all, and they really don't report any changes in court dates. Their no-shows have not gone up. Now the truth is, you know, a lot of people who work in the system live in fear that some kid is going to do something to make everybody want to change the whole system for everybody because this one kid did something bad. Of course, that's just the way we are, you know. But it's remarkable how we thought we needed to incarcerate people pre-trial, at least in the juvenile system, and now we've learned that we actually do not. And it saved a lot of money, and it has, you know, and it hasn't really had too many costs. Now, it hasn't been perfect. There's been one or two complaints out there about some things. I think some kid got in trouble downtown who probably was on pretrial release and in many cases would have been in jail, so he wouldn't have been able to do the new offense. And of course, you know how we are, you know, something like that happens now, we're going to close down the whole program. Cooler heads prevailed. They did not close down the whole program, but there's talk about reform. I guess what I'm saying is that there is a national movement regarding cash bail.
Mm-hmm.
And it should, and I'm glad that there's a county commissioner in Beltrami County like you, who's thinking in terms of, why do we really need all these people in here when we know it's going to drive foster care, when we know it's going to make people lose jobs and apartments, do we really need them in here? Is there another way to secure their presence, right? And I'm glad you're thinking that way. There are a lot of resources to help you advance that cause.
Well, I know that Hennepin had I believe a pilot project for adults where they were given, I don't know, bus tokens or subway passes, transportation, or no, streetcar or whatever passes.
Yeah.
Transportation is a huge issue in Beltrami County. We're a very large county.
Yep.
If you have someone in Redby or in Kellier and they have to get to an appointment, and you can talk to our defense attorneys about how many times, or our judges or the prosecuting attorneys, about how many times someone misses a court date because of transportation mishap. You know, I suggested to my colleagues that we might look into a 14-passenger van and going and picking people up, which got me laughed at. But there's a transportation group working on issues, challenges related to transportation in our county. And I think that in the next year or so, we're going to try a pilot project. I think it'll be similar possibly to, you know, there are people that drive people 100 miles to go to a methadone clinic. And so there's people that are comfortable with driving, people that have experience, that are justice involved, criminal justice involved. So trying to get those people then to volunteer to be ready to be called for people that maybe have a hearing that they can't make it to. There are little things that we can do that is not only going to save the county a lot of money, but it's going to drastically improve the quality of life of our residents. And so there are a lot of win-wins that we can find. But as you're saying, we have to sit down and meaningfully talk to one another and really try to find out how to do that. But I think that we can. Because fortunately, the status quo is becoming so expensive that we can't keep doing the same stupid stuff that we've been doing. And so even if it isn't from a point of compassion, from a point of fiscal responsibility, we're going to be forced to change how we operate, and so maybe we can get both, some savings and do something that's more socially responsible. But
Thank you, Commissioner.
thank you very much.
If anybody wants to share with us, we're here for that purpose, but while somebody is figuring out what they want to say, one of the more interesting things that happened in the course of our working group is that we had the chief of police in Camden, New Jersey come in. And that was interesting because they had a lot of officer-involved shootings. I mean, their numbers were pretty high. And they made a few changes. They took some risks. They did things differently than they had been doing them. And they started getting very good numbers. One thing they did is they started with a new perspective on how to deal with a suspect, right? And what the chief described is that, historically, if you have somebody who, say, has a knife, and you're an officer and you go into the room where they are, you say, put that knife down, and if they don't, you escalate force to make them stop. This officer said, we thought, use time, don't engage if you don't need to. He said, what if we just closed the door and left them in there for a little while and then talked them out? So he described a series of things that were very contrary to what I was used to hearing in terms of police practice. But he said, look, we start with the idea that life is precious, avoid the conflict unless you need to engage right away. Understand that officers' engagement can force injury or death when none was immediately about to happen, because as an officer, you're like, you got a knife, you're going to put that knife down, I'm going to put you down. And he just said, look, what if you closed the door? What if you waited people out? He described this, and then they said, what do we do with this camera, the video? He said, well, they used the video in a simulator to walk through with officers, okay, this happened, what might you have done differently? You're not in trouble, but maybe if you did this as opposed to that, it would have been a better decision. And so you have this, I'll call it consequence-free learning environment. Not a lot of times we don't get the full story, because if anybody actually admits a mistake, that's career death, right? And so people are scared to say that they made a mistake. But, and then, so there are things that they're doing in policing that are reducing the number of officer-related deaths. When you say that, look, we're not going to get into fault for a moment. We can always do that. Lord knows we can. But let's, for a moment, just figure out how we can make sure we can prioritize public safety to make sure everybody walks out of here. And they came up with some good results. It's going to take us doing some things and thinking about some things differently. And it's going to cause us to challenge prior training that we may have received, gotten used to, and we kind of believe it's the right way to do things. But I tell you, when I got married to my first wife, I'm on number 2 now. I was raised in a household where my parents, used corporal punishment on us, and they never hurt us, but they did believe, spare the rod, spoil the child. And my wife said, we're not gonna spank the kids. I'm like, what do you mean? That's bad parenting. I mean, you have to. It's just how it's done. She said, we're not gonna do it, and you have to agree. I said, okay, but get used to some bad kids. She said, you got spankings? I said, sure I did. Said, did you act up? Yeah. She says, my parents never spanked me once ever, and I've never been in trouble, and I got suspended, nothing. So, well, what did they do? They talked to me. Well, we tried it her way. I got 4 kids. None of them have ever been touched by us, and they're all doing really well. So I thought this is how you do it. This is how you express love to your kids. You spank them if they do something wrong. And her thing was like, all you're teaching them is that you're bigger than them, and you can hit. And so why don't they go hit that smaller kid? They're bigger than that other kid. And I guess my point is, we've got to challenge some of our preconceived ideas about how we make a safe community. And it's going to take some risk, and it's going to take a little bit of personal courage and accountability.
Has written comments closed?
No.
My name's Curtis Bucknaga. I just want to echo on some of the things that were said here tonight, like, this is about police encounters, when we first encounter these police. But it doesn't talk about, like the reports and the paperwork that these police hand over to the prosecutors, which hands our people over to the systemic and institutionalized racism, which is a form of violence and brutality on our indigenous people here. But the over-policing by these overzealous cops only mirror the systemic and institutional audacity of Beltrami County, because they are alarmingly culturally incompetent. Now, there's some tribes, when they hire new employees, they go through a day or two of educating their new employees on the land and the people that they're going to serve. So maybe that's a remedy too, so not just an hour maybe, not just running them through, but so these people know who they get acclimated to, the land and the people. Because as Anishinaabe people that live within Anishinaabe territory, we shouldn't just strive for tolerance, which we're not even afforded here. We should strive for acceptance and to be celebrated in our own community, something we're not. So we talk about these encounters, but we also got to talk about the breakdown of some checks and balance between these police and the prosecutors here, who work hand in hand to convict our people, to house us in them jails, to push us through their system, to give us those services that just bust our families apart. Now that is probably the most extreme violence and pain and agony I've ever seen inflicted on people. I've seen families torn apart by the lack of integrity on a lot of these police reports that come and eventually tear our families apart, put us in this system, giving us their services. And then we get in these services, we find out how they're grossly culturally incompetent. So, yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of these things that are being said here today and reinforce it with, because I've been in this jail, I've been in this system, and it hasn't treated me well. So, with that, thanks.
Is there anybody else that's interested in giving us their feedback, their observations, or testimony? Make sure we haven't left anybody out, so.
Anin Ubin is in the cause. Mapuan Yungan. I live and work in Medley. And one of the things that just kind of to address what you were saying about like changing, how we do things, I think part of that has to start in school. hope to do in the future, as Red Lake College grows, is I'd like to see a criminal justice program, but I'd also like to see reaching out to the young people when they're coming into college and like explaining like, hey, this is how things should be done, and you know, these are the people that you're gonna come into contact with, and then just being understanding of the cultural differences, but also understanding of how to treat people in general. But I think that starts in school, and it starts, you know, at the academies and things like that, and we shouldn't wait until something happens and then step back and say, oh wait, well maybe we should do that. So that's just my.
Thank you.
Observation is, I'd like to know why you had the meeting here at BSU and not in the Native community in an appropriate location. We have a semi-Indian center in the northwest OIC where the people go, you know, and so instead we're here at BSU, which is a siloed institution in the community. The natives that you see here are the ones that are attending school and may be employed, but that's not the community. So often we have to come to the location, and it's always something like this, which I'd rather see you all come to our community here in Bemidji, and we have a community, and we have a location, we have a place where there's lots of events that go on. And it would have been, I think, a better turnout of our people if they felt safer in that environment than always coming here.
Or even the Indian Center here. Even the Indian Center here.
Keith?
Yeah.
I'd also like to maybe suggest maybe next time is to invite our tribal leaders, because it's kind of disappointing not seeing our tribal leaders here, because it is Beltrami County laying waste to their tribal members. I mean, that county, the jail is, reports probably are 70–80% Native American. I think Beltrami County is roughly 55,000 people, or about a quarter of that. And then we also did try to offer up suggestions for a community oversight committee like some years ago, but they weren't having it. But I still like to revisit that and reiterate it to maybe get that. And I'd like that committee, maybe that oversight committee to reflect the caseload of the county and the jail, which is, like I said, roughly 80–70% Native American. And maybe that we can change that down the road, hopefully.
Well, let me just say this, and we're scheduled to be here till 8, but so we want to hear from people who want to share. But I just want to say that we've looked all over the country, and we've gotten some folks who do this kind of stuff, and they've told us that there's not one single state in the United States that has had a working group led by the state leaders like the Commissioner of Public Safety, Attorney General, on the issue of deadly force encounters with police. So we're not going to be perfect, right? We take notes on the things that you said because we think that's super important. But I just want to acknowledge that I am certain that you're right. There's probably better places we could have gone, and so but we'll make note of that and try to learn as we go forward. But I do want you to know, and it's little comfort to you, but I just want you to at least know that we did meet at Fond du Lac. And so we have not ignored our indigenous community, and we have indigenous members on the working group as well. But that doesn't make up for the fact that we didn't come to the right place this time, and I'm not trying to get out of it by saying that. I just want you to know we haven't been absolutely clueless, just some. And so I want you to know that. I also want you to know that, many people told me, and I think they told John too, you're going to take on deadly force encounters with community and police. That's crazy. The police are going to be mad at you. The community is going to be mad at you. Just leave it alone. Don't get into it. As these incidents happen, as we see them in the news, we're supposed to just sit by and not do anything because it will be politically safer for us. So we stuck our head in the lion's mouth, knowing that we would get a little fire, because nobody's done this before, there's no recipe to do it, and we're doing the best we can, but we're not gonna get it right all the time. Even when we finish our report and make our recommendations, there will be people who very correctly and legitimately and reasonably say, you didn't have that in there, or you didn't phrase that right, and they're gonna be right. But what we're hoping is that there's some recommendations there that you think are worthy to move forward, and that if we can do some of these, maybe we're gonna have civilians and police officers go home on a night where sometimes they don't. And that's what we hope for. We believe that we can improve. And even though I think you're right, Curtis, and others as well, yes, it's prosecutors, it's, I'm a prosecutor, by the way, it's the system. But we're not gonna just cop out and say, well, because it's the system, we're not gonna do what we can to make the improvements we can with the power and the time we got. We're gonna do the best we can with what we got. I also want you to know that, one of the things that Drew Evans helped us know is that most deadly force encounters are not in the Twin Cities. Most are in greater Minnesota. And this is important to know because a lot of people think, oh, well, if it's in Michigan, it's probably Detroit. If it's in Illinois, it's probably Chicago. If it's in Minnesota, it's probably Minneapolis, St. Paul. No, actually, most are outside of the Twin Cities in the state of Minnesota. So that's why we've spent time making sure that we have a presence here. I want to also make it clear that while there's no doubt that so much of the negative interactions that happen between law enforcement and community involve indigenous people, people of color communities, there's a lot of white people who get into it in a bad way with the police too. We met them. It's true. I don't want to say that this is only a police communities of color and indigenous issue, nor do I want to diminish that and say it's just everybody the same. No, it's not everybody the same, but trust me, there's a lot of white people who feel like I wasn't treated right. And so we're working on this as a community.
Well, the numbers in Beltrami County don't reflect that.
No, ma'am, and I'm not here to tell you
Yeah.
that, I'm not here, I guess I'm
mean,
speaking.
they do. I'm sure that's true. What you're saying is true. But what we see is the disproportionate Native presence in those situations.
And let me say, that is exactly what I'm saying. It's disproportionate, but it's absolutely disproportionate. And if you go down to Minneapolis, it's Native people, Black people, Latino people. It's disproportionate, but it's not exclusive. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
It's disproportionate, but it's not exclusive. Because if we just say, if the facts are that that it really is mostly people of color and indigenous, but there's some white people, but we ignore the white people and act like it's just a people of color problem, then you get people checking out saying, well, it's not my problem. We need to know that it really is the whole state's problem. This is a problem that results in large civil rights awards being paid out. First of all, loss of life. There are huge costs to ignoring this problem. The Kerner Commission report in 1968, remember there were all the riots in the 60s? Some of y'all don't remember that. Some of y'all may actually remember that, but it did happen. And that report that was issued said that one of the sparks of nearly all of them, whether it's Watts or Detroit or any places, was these bad encounters. So it is right and proper and just and smart for us to try to do what we can to help reduce deadly force encounters. So that's what we're doing. So that's all I have to say tonight, and I'll turn it over to our commissioner.
I appreciate the testimony. Now, for those of you that didn't speak tonight, who have something on your heart that you wanted to add, the fact that you didn't want to get up and talk is fine. We are taking testimony in written form. We're taking testimony by email. You can continue to have this conversation, because what we really need is we need your insights. We need to hear from you. And we've been collecting, whether it's in paper or digital form. The Department of Public Safety's website has all of that. As I've mentioned, if you're interested in what we've heard from some of the experts, that is also on the website. We've been live streaming and copying everything, every piece of testimony. Nobody's voice that has come to us is not on our site. We are completely transparent. We want every voice and every piece of information there, because I think that's how we're going to make good decisions, and that's how we're going to go from recommendations in February to actually good decisions and different operations after that. This is the start. This isn't the conclusion. We are teeing this up. We're gathering information so that we can make the changes that we think make the most sense. And your input is going to be absolutely an essential component of the changes that we make. So, I really.
The state of Minnesota has contracted with the Burns Institute, who was contracted by the Annie B. Casey Foundation, to bring some culture into the juvenile justice system on the reservation. And I think that they focused on 3 reservations, and Leech Lake is one of them. And I know that the state of Minnesota has a couple of people that have come to those meetings, but they had the really good sense to contract with Albino Garcia from New Mexico, who runs a reentry program that's really the prototype of culture-based reentry. So they are just getting going, but you might be interested to check that out. I don't know what it's called, but there's a chain, for Minnesota to Burns Institute. The money flow, I guess, is what it is. But they're hoping to do something differently. Yeah. So I don't even know what it's called, but you might want to check it out.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a good night, good evening.
Oh, yeah.